Viewpoint, the program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Turkey Day. I noted one old turkey got away from his natural habitat and made his way up here. Not yours, Paul. Mine. Anyway, tomorrow is Turkey Day, and which brings to mind, we've got some kudos. I've got a list of kudos here. I sat there last night, and I decided I better make some notes on my telephone here. So, number one, the Open Arms Christian Church. Those folks there at 311 Broadway served a huge number of people there the other day. Thanksgiving dinner. Those folks and other churches like that, they kind of kept their shoulders in the harness, and doggone if they don't do some awful nice things. So, kudos to them.
Yes.
By the way, then the Knights of Columbus also did the same thing, and they served a number of people out there, which was a really neat thing. And then, of course, we all know that we had the tragedy up here in Washington, pretty close to my family, because my son's brother-in-law lost everything. I mean, like everything. And so the Lincoln police have gotten together, and the Christian church folks got together, among many, many others, but those are just two that came to mind. And Lincoln Police sent somebody up there, I believe, to help with their patrolling. People being what Harold Trapp used to say, no damn good, come up with looters and situations like that. And it's inevitable that's going to happen. It's a doggone shame. But anyway, kudos to our police department for working on that.
I wonder if ultimately, though, people who take advantage of the beasts and the children and loot when people are so down, I wonder if the bad angel doesn't get them
I'd like
ultimately.
to think so. I'd like to think they're getting what they deserve.
Justice is a nice thing.
That's not a very Christian thought, but they're not very Christian people. So that's a really horrendous thing to think. Anyway, and another personal thing. This is just a little thing. A friend, Maury Elmore from over there in Mason County, Mason City, he remembered when our friend Charles Anderson came home from being a prisoner of war of the Germans during the Second War. And as George Goebel once said, you know about the war, it was in all the papers. Which I thought was one of the great funny lines. He was a real comedian. Anyway, Maury was a young man when Charlie came home, and he was very impressed. And he said Charlie was about as thin as you could stand behind a telephone pole and not find him. And anyway, there's that age difference between Maury. Maury was a Korean veteran. So he made a little desk set for Charles in appreciation to, and I thought that was very nice. He came over here the other day and presented Charles with his handmade desk set.
Really?
Just a nice touch, a little personal thing, and so kudos to Maury.
That was very nice.
Well, it was very nice. I thought so, really. Do you have anything you'd like to add this morning? This is really a two-person show, or three-person. We'll bring Paul in when we get doggone good and ready.
Poor Paul, after he came all the way out
I
here.
can drive all the way up here.
Oh, heck. Oh, heck. No, I'm just sitting here being bedazzled by you.
Boy, it doesn't take much to get you need to. Why don't you introduce our nice guest this morning?
I would really like to do that.
We're going to talk about Turkey Day, which reminds me, this is WLCN in Atlanta. Remember WKRP in Cincinnati?
Oh, do I ever. Do you? Yes, and do you remember that one where Les Nessman, the sportsman, was talking about the golf match and Chai Rodriguez?
Then the great Turkey Day promotions they had dropped those turkeys from the airplane. And the station manager says, "This God is my witness. I thought turkeys could fly."
I wonder if that's on TV anymore.
Oh, that's a shame. That was one of the fun things on TV. That was when TV was fun. You could enjoy some of the programs.
Many a laugh. Oh, well, anyway, we have to get down to business before Turkey Day is here. Paul Gleason, of course, is definitely a historian of note. Paul taught at Lincoln Junior High School for how many years, Paul?
Almost 42 years.
42 years. Had all my kids, had your kids.
Did you ever get it right?
I did at the end.
Yeah. And how many years did you take a group and go out for inaugurations in Washington, D.C.?
We went well, I've been through 10 presidential inaugurations, and in we had the Color Guard, the Young Colonials, and that group, and the Minutemen, and we stayed together for almost 5 or 6 years, and we went out for the 1976 77 bicentennial parade, which was brought in Jimmy Carter into the White House. So we were out there for that one, and that's what our goal was. And those kids are, they're way up there. Let's see, Jack is now 49, and and he was the youngest of the group. So we were there.
Time marches on, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Well, today we are going to talk about Thanksgiving. When I called Paul and asked him if he could be with us today, I said we've romanticized, of course, the first Thanksgiving, and among most other things. And I'm sure that when they talk about the good old days, they weren't so darn good. I think these are the good old days. They had an awful lot of trials and tribulations way back then.
Think of the creature comforts alone.
Well, yeah. We think it's cold in this building. We should have been around then, huh? So let's talk about what the first Thanksgiving really was like. And were the Indians and the Pilgrims that good of buddies?
And were you really there?
My niece said I was. I cut through the woods and did the hunting. No, the Pilgrims came over in 1620. They landed, and almost in the heart of winter, and about December the 13th where they began to build their first house. Otherwise, they lived in almost caves. But before they got ashore, they ended up writing up the Mayflower Compact, which was our first instrument of government in America written in America. Because the Jamestown Colony, that group in the 1607 group, they brought their charter and their government with them written down on paper. The Pilgrims did this here. So we had 101 Pilgrims coming over on the Mayflower, and we had 25 crew members. However, during that first winter and the early spring, half of the group had died from disease and starvation because they had actually landed there, in the worst part. Now, they were actually scheduled to be up in New York, but with the storms, they blew southward, ended up in the Cape Cod area and Plymouth Harbor. And when you land there in November, what they're going through there right now, the weather was bad and it was ungodly cold, so they really didn't have much to start out with. And they decided to stay there, and so they made it through, and so then they began to plant crops in the spring. But what was most important was that these Pilgrims had always net fished. By that I mean they went to sea and they would throw their nets out and bring in the fish that way. But it was people like Squanto who taught them how to fish with a hook and a pole. And also, he taught them that if you take some of these extra fish that evidently you don't want, or the innards, or whatever you're going to do with it, and you bury those with 1 or 2 kernels of grain, that will create the fertilizer to produce better corn crops. And so that's what they did. They learned all of that. And so Squanto was one of their earliest teachers. And the Winnipesaukee Indians and the Pilgrims signed a treaty very early, and they got along very well. But see, these Pilgrims had been involved in hardship a long time. 1534, Henry VIII was getting rid of his first wife. Of course, the Church of England's religion was Catholic at the time, and the Pope would not approve that divorce. So what he does is he breaks away from the Catholic Church and creates the Church of England. But they kept the Catholic practices, and so you had 2 groups within that church that were unhappy with that, and one was the Puritans, who wanted to keep the church as it was, but to purify it. Don't do away with things, just change and purify it. And the Pilgrims said, no, we don't want all those robes, and we don't want all of this there, and they broke away. And Pilgrims in the Bible means wanderers, or that group. So then they went ahead, and the Pilgrims went to Holland and had some freedom of religion there. And being there for 12 years, their older kids began to become more Dutchy and speak the Dutch language, following the Dutch customs, and you know how it is in life. The boys begin to adopt some of the Dutch girls, and that's not what Mom and Dad wanted, so they go back to England, outfit the Mayflower, and then come over to America. That trip took them 9 weeks. That was twice the length of the Columbus journeys over here in 1492.
You talked about discomfort. Have you ever been on the Mayflower?
Yes.
I was on not the original. I want to say. Well, it was the original. It was a replica.
Yeah, I remember the year when they sailed over.
And I thought to myself, on top side, it wouldn't, even then in stormy seas and the clothing and so forth, the equipment they had to be a very tough voyage. But down below, as small as I am, boy, I felt confined. I mean, the ceiling was like about 6 feet.
But not only that, but they had cattle with them.
Yeah,
I mean, they had cattle and they had horses with them, and you can imagine just the sanitary conditions alone, and came over. Yeah.
No wonder half of them died.
Yeah. But their immune system was pretty weak by the time they got over here for that. So then they make it through the first winter, and from there, then they plant their crops and begin to have progress, and so they decided to celebrate Thanksgiving to God for their surviving the winter, and also for their bountiful harvest. And there were 90 Indians at the celebration, roughly, and also we had over half of the pilgrims, which would be about 50-some pilgrims, and 4 of the men went out and did their hunting for that. And it lasted 3 days. This is interesting because in that celebration they had games, and they had singing, and they had sermons, and they had meditations. So what we consider to be Thanksgiving services in a church, they had out there in the open door for that. And you always see this picture of them sitting around this table, but if you notice, I think most of the time the pictures show the Indians are sitting on the ground, and the pilgrims have the chairs and everything else.
Now, there was a name of the tribe that begins with a P. I've forgotten the name of the Indians. It was a long kind of a name that began with P something, and I can't remember what the name of the Indian tribe were. And you have to wonder how they were able to get them to interact. Here are these strange folk coming from off this water that the Indians probably had great fear of, and here are all these folk coming. They wonder how they got there, and how they began to interact. And it's a difficult thing for me to understand in this historical context. Who put all this down? How did it come to
William Bradford? William Bradford is probably the first great historian we had in America. He's got a history of the Plymouth colony. Now, going back to the Indians and who sort of put these groups together there, Squanto had been kidnapped and taken to Spain from his tribe. He had been taken to Spain. Then from there, somehow or other, he got over into England, and there he learned the English language and ways of Englishmen. And I cannot explain why or how, but in 1619, Squanto was back in America, and he went back up into the area of his tribe in that Cape Cod area, and discovered all his tribe had died of disease. So then he just filled it in and stayed with the group that was familiar with the Pilgrims. So Squanto technically was sort of the peacemaker and the go-between, because he knew the English language and could convert the English language to the Wapakan tribe group and work together.
You'd think that with his having been a kidnap victim, that he wouldn't be very warm and fuzzy toward these white people?
I'm thinking that he's probably kidnapped by some Spaniards, and then somehow or other he was able to get out. And this is the area that you don't have a lot of details on, but he ends up in England, and the next thing you know, he's down in 1619. He's over here in America, so he would have probably been brought over here to America by Englishmen. I'm supposing that because he left England and came to America in 1619. Of course, 1619 is also the year that we introduced the Afro-American slaves into America by the Dutch. And that's also the year that we create the Virginia House of Burgesses. That was taking place down there in Williamsburg. Well, meanwhile, you got this colony up there in the Plymouth colony up there in Massachusetts. But Thanksgiving has taken, it's really taken a major turnaround since the days of the Pilgrims, and even into the days when we were kids. And we're all old enough now, we're several decades old, to realize that, hey, there were times when on Thanksgiving Day all of your stores were closed on Thanksgiving, and you'd be lucky to find a grocery store open if you forgot some pepper or something that you needed. And now today, in this 21st century, we're hollyhocks and home free. And and that's the one thing that I think that I find is so much difference in how we changed it.
Yeah, I was going to comment. Thanksgiving and when we were all kids, even you did it, Kay. That really meant something. Today, it's just another day to a lot of folks, unfortunately, and there is so much for which to be thankful that we kind of gloss over it. I'm got to thinking about times back then, and in the same context, the folks who moved on to the west into this country and established their roots there. They were tough dudes. They had to be. We whine and cry about go to cold weather. It's only 26 outside today, and we're, oh gosh, it's cold. Well, we have cold to take care of that. They didn't. That was really. They were tough people.
Yes.
By the first Thanksgiving, did most of the Pilgrims have a house? Had they built
most
for the
of
most
them,
part?
by the time they were, one of the first structures they built was the church. So they could, that was the center of, their
life.
And so a lot of them could stay in there, and then the church was also the armory. It was also the place of worship. It was also part of their defense system. The recreated Plymouth colony that's there today, been restored, not restored, but had to be recreated. It is respectfully, historically correct. Now, whether or not they stepped out on Plymouth Rock, upon coming ashore, that's part of that history there.
The rock that I saw, be awful small for somebody.
Well, not only that, but
I couldn't believe it.
if you were coming ashore, and of course they couldn't necessarily bring the Mayflower right up to land.
Well, no.
So you had to come ashore, and chances are they just stepped on that rock, as you and I step on a rock to keep from stepping in mud and water. And
exactly.
So But the regrettable thing is that over the passage of time, now they have Plymouth Rock is now sort of protected because years ago some vandals did some chipping on it and things like that.
Maybe that's why it's so small when I saw it.
Yeah, really.
648-5510. Somebody might have some questions. Thanksgiving is one of our real sacred holidays, and as I said a minute ago, it's not too important to a lot of people anymore, and that's too bad. But being an old geezer, I like to maintain traditions, and Thanksgiving is one of the traditions we certainly want to honor. And so somebody might have some questions about or some comments about their memories of their childhood and Thanksgiving days. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Judy's permission and our guest permission, and ask our producer if he can be ready for some commercials at this time. live in the studio here with Viewpoint program. Station's WLCN. As you all know, since you're sitting out there waiting with bated breath to hear what's going to come next. Paul, we appreciate the time that you're here. I mean, we were talking off air there about your 42 years in education, and you commented that your first student is now 69 years old.
Yeah.
That's kind of a telling thing, isn't it?
Well, see, he was 17 as a junior in high school.
Think of that.
And I went out of college in 1960 at the age of 22. There's only 5 years difference in our ages.
Sure.
From there. And he's just like he's my kid. I guess what brought us together was the fact that he had survived the bombing raids of London in the 40s, and his dad died over there. And his mom brought him over to America. And she did take him back to see the coronation of the Queen. Huh. And he's never forgot the monarchy and everything else. And so he used to stop in after school, and he lived in the country. And so I always took him home after school because he always hung around and talked history. And he told me one time, he said, you're telling about how we can become president of the United States. He says, I never can, because I was a foreign-born and not an American citizen. I said, well, that's fine, David. I said, but you can have a kid that can have the opportunity to become president of the United States. So, yeah, there's been a lot of kids. And I had one boy that represented the White House in the Carter, in the Clinton impeachment trial. He represented the White House and the Senate. Mm-hmm. He came out on top on that case. And he was one of the youngest members of my color guard, Jack. He represented the White House in that impeachment trial, and so most of the color guard kids became ministers, become involved in public service. And a lot of my students become involved in public service. We can either become public servants to help people, or we can become recipients of the public service, or one or the other. And the best bet is to do the best you can and see what you can do to help the guy next door.
I was thinking here, Judith, Kay, and Jim, that 40-some years ago, you probably encountered a different socioeconomic situation in that parents were more involved. And even a short time ago, 40-some years ago, you had more two-parent families. Today, unfortunately, we have a lot of single-parent situations, and that's very difficult at best. And I just wonder if you have a comment about that, Paul.
I've seen that trend, but in today's society, it almost takes two parents to bring home the money to take care of the kids. Look at the changing cost of the school lunch program. You used to pay 40 or 50 cents for your school lunch and everything else. And I started out teaching in my career. I got $300 a month for teaching. I had to pay rent. I had to buy a car, but gas was only like 25 cents a gallon. Mm-hmm. Hamburger was 3 or 4 pounds for $1. Loaf of bread was probably 15 or 20 cents. So that was it. But the whole scope of education has really changed over the passage of time. And I think we got all this technology now. And of course, I'm still back in the 1492 period. I'm doing good to learn how to turn on a light switch. But technology, I got a cell phone, and I just want to use it to call out, or somebody call me. I don't worry about pictures and all that good stuff on that. But no, that was it. But we teachers, when I first started out teaching and everything, we were beyond 8 to 4 as a teacher. You couldn't get done at 4 o'clock. You were there for the kids.
And you had the respect of the kids and their parents.
You had the respect, and also for the parents. And if Johnny gave you a cross eye, all you had to do was call the parent, and the kid was organized by the time he came back the next day. But I found that you don't, teaching is not something you get into for the money. If I'm looking at not the money, you do it because you love the kids. And I have found that, in the course of a year, I had a lot of money going out of my pocket because some kid would forget the school lunch And so you just here, take it, and you knew you weren't going to get it back, but don't worry about it. You know, it's just life. And some kid would need this and that and the other. Or there's a time when a kid had to have dress trousers for graduation. So you just, somehow or other, you say to him, here, now, take this money here. You go down and buy your pair of dress trousers. You slip it to him so he's not embarrassed about it. Or needed a shirt or something like that. You take care of that. Teachers did that, you know. And I think that's it. But those are the kids. Those are the kids that still come back. Those are the kids that still turn right around and they contact you or they call you. I saw a kid the other day I hadn't seen for almost 35 years. You know, he came back. Not an A student, but he was a person. And well-versed in the particular job he has.
Well, back to Thanksgiving of the old days. If we could continue on this track right now, we might not get done till 10 o'clock if we talk about old times in school and so forth. And we have a station here that we have to work on an operation here. It's supposed to be done by 9 o'clock.
You mentioned something about the church as well as being their place of worship and a place where they could come in out of the cold as being their armory.
Well, that's where they kept their guns and their arms also stored, and because that's probably one of the first buildings that they put up. So he had to become it was the church, the place of worship. It was the holy place, but it was also, quote, a warehouse until they're able to put up the armory to keep the guns and ammunition separate. They had the granary where they kept the grain and the supplies stored eventually. And then, but they each had their little plot of ground, which was very, very important. Of course, you also have to remember, in terms of their defense system, they had to be pretty close together. So what they did was to have their homes pretty close to a compact area, and then they farmed outside of their homes. And the reason for that is that's a tradition from a lot of European communities where you lived in town and you went out for the farmsteads. But they didn't have the 5,000 acres of land or 2,000 or
180.
Yeah, 180 acres.
Well, but they didn't have $1 million combine to,
right. So
take
I mean,
care
they followed along with progress. Of course, we had the Pilgrim story also reflected in Longfellow's The Courtship of Miles Standish, and John Alden and Priscilla. And John Alden was embarrassed. He wanted to ask Priscilla Miles to marry him, and he wouldn't do it. And he went to William Bradford, and Bradford said, "Speak for yourself, John." So,
Every kid that ever went through a history class certainly ought to remember that one particular.
That's right.
We're talking about the turkeys, always the traditional. Odds are on that turkey certainly was not the meat of the day back then. Perhaps they had some turkey, but they probably augmented it with deer and any other fowl that they could get.
They had deer, they had swans, and they had ducks, and then they had the turkeys, and then they had their geese for that. So they had the whole group there. And interesting enough, the Indians were not familiar with potatoes. They did not have it. Probably did not have potatoes at the first Thanksgiving, but they had their corn, and they had parsnips and things like that, and cranberries was probably not the first food of choice for first Thanksgiving. It's about 50 years before we get into the cranberries as a traditional Thanksgiving meal, and but turkeys were plentiful in those days. And geese, and of course the ducks and everything else.
Did a ship not have to come, though, from England or someplace with staples that they wouldn't have had?
Right. They in the spring, then there would be ships that would come over. Of course, the Mayflower returned home. However, nobody at Plymouth chose to return home on the Mayflower. In spite of their hardship and all of that, none of those people chose to return home.
how much time had elapsed between the Mayflower's landing and the Mayflower's leaving?
They probably would have left somewhere around April. In terms of the season, I don't understand trade winds and all of that, but they had the knowledge of that, and so it came in December when they stepped ashore. Actually, late November, December, when they came ashore for that.
So those people had a bad taste of it already.
And they landed in thickets and jungles, and I say jungles, but American forest land. I mean, just imagine going into some place that is not inhabited all the time, and just going in there and say, my gosh, here's where we're going to live.
Yeah.
And the land is not cleared. There's nothing there that is actually cleared for that.
I got it figured why those that came over didn't go back. Anybody come across that North Atlantic once says never again.
Right.
That can be a very, very, very difficult.
Very rough. And they were actually supposed to have landed up in the area around the Hudson River, and they blown off course with several storms, and they said, hey, we're just going to stay here and right in the middle of the cold for that. I mean, you can take the Massachusetts weather, let's say today, and probably didn't miss it too far about when they had been there within a month, the cold weather and everything else.
But you think about sailing in those days. You stop to think about that, the lack of the equipment that they had, very rudimentary, and you wonder that they ever been able to find land instead of just kind of sailing down past South America somewhere.
But see, they had the compass, the astrolabe, and whatever crude sails and everything they had on there, but just think about the accuracy or inaccuracy of their maps.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever see reproductions of maps of America going back to before we were at the age of discovery, they were completely out of wacko.
What was that second word you used, Paul? They had the compass and the what?
Astrolabe.
I've never heard that word, I don't think.
The compass would give you the direction where the north is.
Yeah.
The astrolabe would also tell you your distance north or south of the equator.
Oh.
Now you see, you're supposed to learn something every day.
So I got that job over?
Today you're done for learning. you can go the rest of the day on your merry way.
That was a quick day.
But you know, you reflect upon the sailors of that time. Phenomenal. Just really incredible that they were able to do what they did.
Yeah.
And by the way, they were pretty tough people.
Yeah, they had to be.
Oh, yeah.
They were just weather-worn and beaten, you know what I mean? Standing out there, surviving those storms and everything else with that.
How did they fare with the cows and horses that they brought with them? Did they make it to spring?
Yeah, they did. And they had extra feed supplies and things down in the hold of the ship and everything else.
Well,
you had the cattle were on be on they were in the cargo area, the lowest, and they had stalls.
Now you think of this, you see, shipping today, they come up to a port, and they've got a place to unload and so forth, and they got all this equipment. And
chances are they're in a box being lifted off the ship.
Now, this ship had to drop anchor offshore somewhere, and now these people got to get in these boats, crude as they were, and get ashore. Well, we get the people ashore. Now, how are we going to get these animals out? I mean, it's really interesting to think about that, the logistics of that at that time.
Yeah. Just getting them loaded, you would have had flags and everything else.
Yeah, you just have to wonder about that.
But, yeah.
The cat was not on that ship, by the way.
Okay, well, okay.
Is there one thing, Paul, in your study of our American history and that time, at the Thanksgiving time, that sticks out in your mind as something that we ought to be aware of?
In terms of
what, some one little thing that stuck out in your studies that struck your imagination as, boy, isn't that interesting?
I think that probably what was always tried to instill to the kids was that even though when the Pilgrims were down and out, and there were times when some of them were so sick and weak they didn't have almost enough people to bury the dead.
Yeah.
Somehow or other they they constantly looked ahead to tomorrow and another sunrise. I think it was the faith that they had in the future, and the fact that they had to work together for survival, and you know, they go with that. And the other day when I was just putting some thoughts together, just thinking about Thanksgiving and what I was going to say and what's important and everything. You know, we got Thanksgiving with football, we got Thanksgiving with cranberries, and we got the Macy Parade and everything else. And by the way, the very first Thanksgiving parade was the Gimbal Parade in Philadelphia. Then we go to Macy's, and they used animals in their first parade, and they go from there, and then they put a Felix the Cat helium balloon, air balloon, a rubber air balloon. And so Macy's Thanksgiving Parade tomorrow will use, the U.S. government uses more helium than any other in the United States. Macy's Thanksgiving Parade will be the second consumer of helium in that parade tomorrow. It'll be three, yeah.
That's an interesting little observation.
And
if they're allowed to have their balloons.
Yeah, if they're allowed to have it. But I don't know. The other day I just come across something laying in a book I thought was important. You know, we should be thankful for each separate day, for every moment in it. And the chance to work, to learn, and to play. You know, sometimes we complain about working. Well, I got to go to work tomorrow. But you know what? Be thankful that you can walk, you can get up and go to work. To set a goal and to win it. Be thankful for the common things we take for granted: the sun, the rain, the birds and the trees, each flower that is planted. Thankful for the winter time. We got to kill these insects, you know. Spring, summer, and fall. Also for the wise and generous God that watches over us all. And for this land, America, within free men are living with the right to worship as they please. I always say, and not to worship at all, if that's your choice. We render our thanksgiving. You know? So Thanksgiving is a period. And perhaps every day should be a Thanksgiving day. One day set aside, but every day is a Thanksgiving day. And by the way, yesterday was the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's proclamation of Thanksgiving in 1863. It was yesterday.
Is that
November 26th. And also today, or Thanksgiving and Hanukkah will be the first time they've been on the same day. And it will be, this morning I can't remember the numbers, but thousands of years before that will ever happen again. But Abraham Lincoln's 150th anniversary of Thanksgiving.
Well, you're exactly right, Mr. Gleason. You know, there is so much today, right today, there is so much want out there. These are tough times for a lot of folks. This would be a time for those who are a little more fortunate to remember that, and perhaps to find some way to express their thanks for all that we have. You know, I was talking earlier as we opened the program about the folks that have done some Thanksgiving meals and so forth for the community. I probably forgot, Judith K., that the Gazzardo family will once again step to the plate and serve a lot of meals. That's another nice thing. People just drive up to the back in the alley there, and they get their meals, and they're told where to take them. And during the course of the day, they'll serve several hundred meals. Remarkable thing in a small community, and we certainly need to remember those things. We need to remember all the things for which we should really be thankful, and we're a lucky lot here. And so step up to the plate, folks, where you can. We will close with usual kind of a comment or something, and I read something where the Puritans were giving thanks for being preserved from the Indians. In today's times, we're giving thanks for being preserved from the Puritans. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.